Testing, testing. Right, fam. Head home tomorrow for a bit. Now it's testing, testing, testing. How's that? Is that okay? Visiting here. Cool. Oh.
I feel special. I hope I'm the only one now.
Yeah. Now what will Okay. Testing, testing. That better? Excellent. Hey, John. Good. Hey, James. Hey, I'm Brian. How you doing, mate? Yeah, you too. Ah, another Kiwi. Really? I met some Genesis people this morning as well. A couple of guys from Genesis. I live in New Plymouth. Yeah. Hey, Mick. Hey, I'm Brian.
Nice to meet you, mate.
Hey, Scott. Good. How are you, mate? Hey, Darren. Hey, how are you?
Good, yourself?
Yeah, I think we may have met before, Darren.
Sure.
You look familiar.
I was in your session yesterday.
Oh, well, that'll be why then. I remember faces. Yeah, that's right. Actually, I can remember what I did 30 years ago. I can't remember what I did last week, you know. Nobody's heard that they pushed it out because we were late with the roundtable, so? No, okay. We'll make a start, eh? G'day. Kia ora koutou. My name's Brian Ropitini. I spent 35 years in the petrochemical sector. I've retired at the end of 2019 as the manufacturing director for Methanex New Zealand. And since then I've gone on and joined a couple of boards, enjoy a bit of governance stuff, do a bit of not-for-profit, do a bit of training in health and safety and asset management and those sorts of things as well. But now I just spend my time doing things that I enjoy and hanging out with people that I think are good people. And I really enjoy doing this stuff as well. I like sharing what I've learned over my career. I'm a fitter and turner by trade, and I was fortunate enough to be in an organisation that gave me opportunities, invested some professional development into me, and was able to move up the food chain into higher honours, not because I was any better than anyone else, I just got the opportunities. So I'm hoping that today you'll walk away. This is not about technical health and safety training. This is all about what I've learned over my 35 years of managing multiple major hazard facilities and understanding that compliance doesn't necessarily equate to engagement. And I learned a lot of things through my own mistakes over my career in terms of how to get better engagement and how to create a really healthy safety culture within the workplace. Because at the end of the day, you want people to do things for the right reasons, not because they're forced to. Okay? So we're going to go through a few things today. If you see anything up here that you've seen before, just go with the flow. Don't spoil it for other people. I like people to engage, so if you've got questions, just ask. We'll keep it pretty light and entertaining, and I'll just keep checking on my time as we go through. Make sure that we give everything the time that it deserves. Okay, I'm going to start by just sharing a story with you. And the story is this, and I want you to think about this. So my friend's oldest son went fishing a while ago. He rang me and rang his dad, all excited because he had caught the biggest fish he'd ever caught in his life. All right? Now I want you to think in your mind what that fish looks like. Okay? Have you got a big fish in your mind? Now, for some of you, it might be a fish like that, fairly good sized snapper, all right? For some, it might be big tuna, marlin, something else. But this is the actual fish that my friend's oldest son caught. But now you're thinking, hold on, who's this guy here? How can we trust him? There's no way on earth that you could ever stand behind that being a big fish, right? Is that correct? Or you have to be a bit nuts to be able to stand in front of a group of people and say, that is a big fish. Well, could be. But there's some information that's missing. This is the information, right? Now, can you understand why that could be described as, well, actually, it was the biggest fish. I didn't say it was a big fish. I said it was the biggest fish he'd ever caught. Okay? So technically, I wasn't lying, but technically, I was bending the information to make you think something different. Because none of you would have conjured up in your thinking a fish that little when I asked you to think about the biggest fish this boy had caught. But now that you see the whole picture, you can understand why it could be described as the biggest fish and why it's not a very big fish. Okay? I never told you how old the boy was. I never told you whether he was out on a boat or off the beach or anything else. And so what happens as leaders is sometimes we communicate information, and the variation of how that information is received can be very broad. All right? So I say something with the picture in my mind, you receive the information and conjure up a different image or potentially the same image, but in a room full of 20 or 30 people here today, there would probably be at least 15 different variations of that same scenario. And the reason that I start with that story is because as a leader, because remember this is all about the safety culture that you want in your organisation is totally dependent on the behaviours of the leaders. Right? The frameworks that you have in place, the rules, the safety systems and policies and procedures, they help to provide a framework and shape some of the safety outcomes, but it's the leaders' behaviours that will determine the culture. Right? And we're talking about moving beyond compliance to care. right? So when you see a situation like this and you see how information can be shared and completely misunderstood or misrepresented, underrepresented or overrepresented. So how often when leaders talk about this stuff, if I was to stand here and say, as the most senior person in this organisation, your health and safety is my highest priority. What are people hearing? What are people thinking that means in their mind? What does it mean to you? Hey? You've all heard it, right? Some of you might have even been responsible for saying it. But do we ever stop to ask, what does that mean to you? Mick, what does that mean to you?
As the manager who said it,
Yeah.
I've got to provide all the tools, processes, and a safe culture, like a safe place, a safe thing.
Yep.
You can stop work, so whether that's communicated well in one statement is
Yeah.
challenging.
So what determines what other people hear when they hear that message? When other people receive that information, what will determine what they think that means? Potentially the level of trust they have in you, right? Hey? Context. Okay, so give me some context.
We're doing this to make sure you're safer. We're doing this to make
Yeah.
you safer. Giving them actually ideas on what, and frameworks in place
Yeah.
to show that this is what we're doing to make you safer at work.
Yep. So what they think will be completely determined by all of their experiences of safety first, up until that point in time. Just like when you thought about a big fish, it was limited by your experiences of what a big fish was. Some of you might have thought about the biggest fish you've ever caught. You might have thought about the biggest fish someone you know has caught, or you might have thought about the biggest fish you've seen caught on TV. Okay? So what you think is somewhat limited to your experiences up until that point in time. And if people hear this, and their experience up until that point in time is that, yep, I hear every senior person say that, but when push comes to shove, and when it's going to cost a little bit more money, we take a shortcut. If that's what they think based on their experiences or their perception of experiences, then that's what they're going to limit that statement to. And that's why people are surprised when they get caught taking a shortcut and you go, hey, Scott, didn't you hear me say that your safety is our highest priority? What are you doing taking a shortcut? Why don't you get a scaffold built? And you say, well, last time I asked for a scaffold, my boss said I couldn't have one. He told me to go and get the ladder. Right? And that's what your safety as our highest priority means to Scott. So when we're sharing this kind of information, we need to try and understand what are people hearing when we say certain things, and what could shape them to think something different to what I intend. And how do I reinforce that what I say is what I do? Okay, and we're going to talk about how the brain works in a minute, which helps to sort of understand why, as humans, we take shortcuts. Okay, this is supposed to be a brain, a human brain. Now, within our brain, let me just chuck these up here. When it comes to receiving information, how we receive the information will be determined by our biases. And we have unconscious biases and we have conscious biases. Unconscious biases are those things that cause you to react automatically because of how you've been conditioned. For instance, if your belief that most senior managers don't really care about safety, they do it because they have to, because they don't want to go to jail. If that is your belief, I'm not saying many people should believe that these days, but if that's what your belief is, then that's how you'll receive the information, unconsciously, right? The conscious part of that would be is when you put your hand up and you say, hey, Brian, you're talking a whole lot of crap, all right? I don't believe a word that you say. Now it's conscious bias, okay? I don't trust managers because you always let me down. You always say one thing and do another, all right? When you verbalize it or you intentionally take action to oppose it, that's conscious bias, but when it's just an automatic position that you take, it's an unconscious bias. And the keynote speaker earlier today talked about data biases, right? I thought it was really interesting. So these are hidden beliefs and exposed beliefs. So these are beliefs that you have that I don't know that you have. And sometimes you might not even know that you have. You just react and you default to self in certain situations. It just happens automatically. But exposed beliefs are, hey, I know that's how John feels about senior managers, right? Because he expresses that all the time. So it's out there. At least I know about his bias and I can do something about that. So we have this thing called a brain. How much time do you think that we spend in unconscious bias? Or well, let's call this autopilot. People know what I mean when I talk about autopilot? What does that mean? Hey? 90%? Anybody else want a different number? 60? How much? 99. 99. Who said 99? Put your hand up. Don't be shy. You're right. It's actually a little bit more than 90%, 99%. Okay, I think it's 99.7% an autopilot. And this is everything that the body does. So this is everything that you're receiving through your five senses, your smell, your taste, your hearing, your feeling, all of your internal organs operating, everything else is all happening automatically, right? You're not even aware of your heartbeat until I ask you a question and say, hey, how many beats a second or how many beats a minute is your heart doing right now? And now you'll become aware of your heart beating, right? But up until that point, just doing what it's doing. You're taking a breath in and the lungs are transferring the oxygen into the blood and the blood is taking it to the brain and everything's just happening on autopilot. So that means that we have, in conscious mode, there's only 0.3% of the time of all of the things that our brain transacts. How many bits of information do you think our brain transacts every second? $33,000 bits of information every second your brain deals with. And we know also that our brain is only capable of consciously focusing on no more than 7 for the average person. Right? You can only be consciously aware of 7 bits of information at one time. So all of the rest of this stuff is all happening automatically. Now, if you want an example of that, have you ever experienced driving home from work? You get into the driveway and you don't recall much of the trip home? That's because you drove home on autopilot, right? It's a regular path. Maybe you've been doing it for 10 years or longer, all right? And the brain becomes a good predictor of the immediate future. If you keep doing the same things that you did yesterday, you're probably going to get the same outcomes. So if I back out of my driveway, head down there and turn left, right, I'm probably going to get to the right direction of work, and then I turn right and then left and then go up the hill, do a U-E, and then I'm at work, right? So if I do those same things, I'm going to end up at work, and if I do the reverse when I come home, I'm going to end up in my driveway until something changes. You know, there's a roadblock or there's an accident or there's a near miss or something like that, and then all of a sudden you're snapped back into a conscious state and you become completely aware of your driving and what's going on. Now there's a good reason why this happens, and the reason is to conserve energy. If you had to consciously manage every function and every bit of information that came through your brain, you wouldn't be able to consume enough energy to keep it going. As it is, your brain consumes 20% of all the energy that you put into your body, 20% of it goes to your brain, is consumed by that. So this is by nature and by design, it does this so that we don't become totally wasted every day thinking about everything. Has anybody, do you remember what it was like when you first started to drive a car? How conscious were you of everything that you did? Right? Especially when you went for your driver's test, right? You know, side check, seatbelt in, foot on the clutch, into gear, foot off the clutch, a little bit on the accelerator, indicator, pull out, off you go. And you're constantly thinking about it. You get back from a 5-minute drive and you're tired because you've had to concentrate all that time on everything. How many people consciously think about driving a car today? jump in it, whack the set button, off you go, right? And you're probably finding a radio station or twiddling with something else at the same time. Okay, and that's all because of our ability to operate on autopilot. All right? The other thing is that we have this thing in our brain that's called an RAS, a reticular articulating system. And what that does is that acts as a filter. And this is where our biases and everything come in. So this acts as a filter because it knows that you can't consciously manage all the information that comes into your brain, so the RAS does it for you. And what it does is the RAS determines what's important to you, and when something comes in there that's important, it brings it into the conscious part of your brain. Let me give you an example. How many people have bought a new car recently? Okay. What sort of car did you buy? Sorry? All right, okay, maybe that's not as common as other cars. It sounds like a pretty nice car. But, okay, have you noticed more of those cars on the road?
Yes, so many more.
Yeah, okay. Now, do you think that you live in Melbourne?
No,
Okay, so do you think everybody in Canberra rushed out and brought a fancy Audi just because you did? No. So this is a classic example of your RAS at work. So prior to you buying your Audi, your RAS determined that Audis weren't important to you. So every time one drove past, it completely filtered it out into your unconscious part of your brain. The day that you became interested in it, in an Audi, you triggered your RAS and said, Audis are now interesting to me. So now every time one drives past you, the RAS throws it into the conscious part of your brain and says, look, there's another one. Look, there's another one. It's just that prior to you buying one, they were hidden from you because your brain is doing things on autopilot, and up until that point in time, it was not interesting. It wasn't interesting to you at all. Okay? A similar thing happens with pregnant women, right? Become pregnant, and all of a sudden they notice all these other pregnant women around. It's not that there's more of them, it's just that now they're in a stage of life where this is kind of interesting for them, and RAS makes them more aware of all of this stuff. Okay? So this is just a real basic thing about the brain, and I'm not a brain person, I'm just repeating something that I was taught many years ago. But it helps to give you an insight into why humans behave the way that they do. The other thing that the brain does it will justify anything we do. All right? How many people have ever taken a shortcut? Be honest. We've all done it, right? Okay? What happened when you took the shortcut? Anything bad happen? Hey? Okay. So you had a bad experience when you took one shortcut. Okay, good. So up until that point in time, let's just work with me here. So up until the point, was that the first time you'd taken that shortcut? Third time. So what happened the first time? You got away with it, right? So now your brain is saying, first time it might be, actually I know this is a shortcut and I shouldn't be doing it, but I'll just do it. Nothing happens, right? So now you believe that it's kind of okay, and in your mind you're justifying it. So then the second time you did it, was it easier? Of course it was, right? Because now the brain has justified the shortcut, and you got away with it. The third time, it was easy again, but this time, something changed. Now there's a consequence. So it doesn't matter how hard you justify it in your brain now, you have a new experience which has shifted your belief, and now you chose not to do it again. Now, sometimes we stop doing it for a period of time, and then we normalize the event, and then we carry on with the bad behavior. But this is exactly what happens with humans in the workplace when people take shortcuts, right? It's because nothing bad ever happens when they've taken one until the day that somebody does. Then we do an incident investigation, and the person that took the shortcut gets in trouble. We send out a bulletin reminding everybody of the rule and not to take that shortcut. And for a period of time, people don't take the shortcut. Now, if there's no consequence, people will continue with the shortcut until something bad happens. Okay, so this is our brain. And given the fact that we can only process 7 bits, or be consciously aware of 7 bits of information at a time, it's like a spotlight. It's very narrow focus. And if you imagine if that wall was our past, in terms of what our brain thinks about, we spend a lot of time thinking about what's happened, and we think a lot about what's happening in the future, like next week or tomorrow or whenever. But it's very hard for our brain to be consciously thinking about in the moment, unless something wakes us up or snaps us into consciousness. And sometimes that can be through asking questions or telling stories or a near miss or a bad experience. Okay? So just use this information as a basis for what we're going to talk about for the rest of the session. And there's going to be times where I'm going to ask you to get into groups and do some working as well. So let me give you an example of this. What do you guys call this in Australia? Mostly Australians in the room, so what do you call this? Arsehole. Yeah. What else? Revenue. Speed trap. Speed trap. What else? Speed camera. Do you know what they really are called? It's called a traffic safety camera. So some of you people in the room are senior people, right? So if some of you can turn your nose up at a government-implemented safety device, are you surprised that when you get up and talk to your team and talk about we've implemented this new procedure or this new control or this new rule for safety, that they go, what a load of crap. It's just about making my life harder. It's about making you look good. It's about ticking a box. It's about all these other reasons, but sometimes they don't respond in a way that it really is there to keep them safe or to improve safety. How many people believe that that's a safety device? Yeah, so one of the things that I could never get with people that are violently opposed to these things is, well, if you're not speeding, you've got nothing to worry about.
And I think that's proven in New South Wales.
Right.
New South Wales last year had to take the signs, they said no more signs to tell you that there's a speed camera, mobile speed camera on the road.
Right.
Victoria's had that from the beginning.
Yeah.
The revenue in New South Wales quadrupled in 24 hours. So
Yeah.
the entire annual revenue was made in 24 hours.
Right.
Just by taking the warning signs down that the camera was there.
Okay. So do you think that they did that just to triple their revenue, or because they wanted to, or they want to penalise people for speeding?
I
Eh?
think it's my issue with it being called the safety camera.
Yeah.
Is that it's a delayed effect. So I've had a few of these. I do 55,000 Ks a year, so
Yeah.
I get the occasional one of these.
Yeah.
Most of them take anywhere between 6 weeks and 6 months to arrive.
Right.
So if you are
Okay, so that's a little delayed in terms of the outcome, but typically you know when you've driven past one, right?
not always.
Okay.
New South Wales you do, and if you get caught in New South Wales, then
Yeah.
you deserve to be caught.
So typically you know when you're driven past one, so because you're usually left with that horrible feeling about, oh crap, all right? So let me ask you another question. What do you do when you see that sign? What's your reaction?
Why should it be there?
Eh?
When I see that sign, I always think, why should it be there? Why can't people abide by the rules and
Yeah.
always have their vehicle?
Let me tell you why we don't abide by the rules,
Yeah, so like,
all right? Because of how our brain works.
I feel the same.
Okay, have you ever looked down and noticed that you're going above the speed limit?
No.
Really, I do. And I'm not intentionally speeding. Every now and then, gee, I'm doing 55 in a 50 area. Right?
Even I've done, I pay attention to speed signs
Yeah.
rather than paying attention to that particular sign.
Okay, well, you're an anomaly to the rest of us, because I can tell you exactly what you do when you see that sign. What do? You slow down. So what's the desired outcome? Is that a good reaction to slow down? Of course it is, right? That's right. But sooner or later, you know that you know if they're bogus signs or not, right? And then you default back to taking shortcuts because there's no outcome. Okay, so let's agree that most people slow down when you see that sign. You put your foot on the brake and then you check how fast you're going. All right? Most people. Unless you really don't care, and you wave when you drive past. But most people will slow down. What happens? What do you do when you see that sign? Well, if you've just come out of a 50k zone, yeah, you'll speed up, right? But typically that sign does nothing to your behaviour, right? Yeah, typically you just drive past. Why? Because there's no consequence, right? There's no consequence apart from having an accident and having more severe injuries if you're going at a faster speed, right? Okay? Unless that happens to you, there's no other consequence for that, typically, right? You might get pulled up by a radar or something like that, but typically the impact of that sign is way different to the impact on your behaviours of that sign, right? So is this helping to keep the speed down on the road? Oh, I think it is, because everyone just said they slow down when they see it. Yeah. 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 But do you know what happens over time? If you develop a habit over time, then that habit sticks with you. And so what we're going to talk about is creating default habits that default to a safe position. How many people consciously think about putting their seatbelts on? Really? Every morning? Consciously? Just jump in your car and chuck it on, right? You don't sit there and go, right, JHA or hazard identification, put my seatbelt on because it's going to stop me from hitting the windscreen if I have an accident, blah, blah. I don't even think about it. How many people were alive when they introduced the rules around having to wear a seatbelt? Yeah. How many people were driving cars before that rule came in? Yeah. Yeah, okay, so I don't know when it came in Australia, but I remember at the time in New Zealand when that rule came in, people didn't like it, and they pushed back on it. And so the police, or the traffic department, had to provide some incentive through punitive means, and they sat at intersections and they gave you tickets if you weren't wearing your seatbelt. Until over a period of time, that behaviour just becomes normalised. So people go, I'll put my seatbelt on because I don't want to get a fine. That's right. And that's because now that behaviour is so normalised now that if you tried to drive without it, it would feel really weird. And this is now creating an unconscious or an autopilot behaviour that defaults to a safe position, not an unsafe one. Okay? And just like if you had enough of these signs around and you were constantly weren't sure when the next one was going to turn up, you'd become more conscious of your speed, and sooner or later you would just default to driving to 100 kilometres an hour. Or that would be your intention.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with the SES.
Right.
We're going to use rooftop safety systems all the time, and as painful as it is.
Yep.
But now when I'm at home,
Yep.
and I'm going to jump on my roof, even if it's a flat roof,
Yep.
that transition point of getting on and off the ladder now without a rope, without a safety system,
Yeah.
feels a bit weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd rather have one.
That's right. Yep. So this is your unconscious bias, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we all have unconscious behaviour. So I want you to just all fold your arms, right? Fold your arms, okay? Now just take a look. Some of you would have left over right or right over left, right? But how many people thought about that action? Do you know how many muscle movements are required to carry out that activity? There's thousands of them, right? All these little muscle groups and everything all have to behave in a certain way for that to happen. And all those signals come from the base of your brain down through your spine in a coordinated manner, and you didn't have to think about a single one of them. Because over time, you have trained your body to do that automatically, right? Okay, so just remember, you've got fingers in certain positions and stuff. Now I want you to put your arms down by your side, and I want you to cross your arm with the other arm over the top. Right? Okay, now stay sitting like that with your arms crossed the opposite way. What are your arms telling you? There's something wrong, right? There's something wrong here. It feels a little weird. Now you're all of a sudden, when you just did it the first time, no consciousness about it at all. Don't even think about it. But now you do it a different way, it feels a little weird. In fact, even I still can't do it properly. I have to do this and then change my arms over. So I just can't do that. It's hard, okay? Because we've been programmed. So the trick is over time, if we can program ourselves to default to safe behaviours, right, and responding to situations in a way that aligns with the safety culture that we want if you're a leader in an organisation, you have to train yourself to think and behave and align yourself with your values and the culture that you want to establish, so that that becomes your default behaviour, not one that is misaligned. Does that make sense? So if the rule at work is that when we sit with our arms crossed, it has to be this, right? And if you don't do that, you're going to lose your job. And your normal way of doing it is this. The first time you see someone get fired for doing it the wrong way, ooh, and you'll train yourself to do it, just like people got trained to put their seatbelts on. So now it just becomes a normalised behaviour. I could never walk out of my office without putting my hard hat on when I was working. It just felt weird. Safety glasses, steel cap boots. Even if there was no need for it, it just felt weird. You know, sometimes I visit other work sites and they don't have the same requirement, but I still put mine on because it just feels weird. And you know what? It's a safe default position, not an unsafe one. I might look like an idiot because I'm the only one wearing steel cap boots and a hard hat and glasses, but that doesn't matter, right? Don't worry about that. Okay, so there are certain things, and we call this ABCs of human factors. Have you heard of that? So A means antecedents, behaviours, and consequences. So the antecedent is the signal or whatever it is that triggers a certain action or a certain response. The behaviour is then how you respond to that trigger, and then the consequence is what happens as a result of that. So for instance, you're driving down the road, you're approaching an intersection, traffic lights, and the light turns orange. What response, so the antecedent is the orange light. What behaviour does that trigger in you? Who speeds up? Right? Who slows down? Okay. What will change how you respond to that? So how many people who speed up just get through on a red light? Does that happen? You go, man, that was close, right? Now what happens the next time you do that and then all of a sudden there's flashing lights behind you, you get a ticket for $140 for going through a red light? What do you think your next time you're approaching that situation, what do you think you're likely to do? Yeah. If you're a smart person and learn from your mistakes, you're probably going to slow down, right? You're probably not going to run the gamut again. And you'll keep doing that until there's a consequence. This is why speed cameras are reasonably effective, because you know that there's a consequence. There's no arguing with the police or anything. There's no negotiation. You know that at some point in 6 months or whatever it is too long, but you know that there's a consequence and it's going to be pretty timely. Does anybody in the room smoke cigarettes? Okay, so I'm not judging. I smoked as well. But the reason that people smoke cigarettes, even with all of the known bad health effects, is that the consequences like 20, 30, 40 years into the future. I could get hit by a truck in that time. So I will just enjoy puffing away on cigarettes, all right? My dad was a lifetime smoker, diagnosed with cancer. Next day he gave up smoking. 3 months later he's dead. You know, so it's just, as humans, we're kind of conditioned to behave certain ways, and triggers will change behaviours or not. And this ABC, antecedents, behaviours, consequences, is something that I want you to think about, because it does determine how we behave in different situations. Okay? Right. Time for you to just reflect. If you can, just sort of get into groups. I want you to spend maybe just 5 or 10 minutes and just think about what are 1 or 2 things that you've learned about human behaviour that maybe you didn't know before, and 2, what are 1 or 2 action points that you could take in order to be more effective at communicating. Right? So we've talked about how we might communicate a message and how the message might be received. I showed you some stuff, and then I gave you some more information, help change how you might see that piece of information. So just, if you can, just get into little groups in just a couple of minutes and just discuss it, just briefly. Hey, I can't remember what time we started. Hey, do you know how to manage the air conditioning in here? Up here? It's quite warm, eh? Okay, I'll give you maybe another 2 minutes just to wrap things up. Okay. Okay, I just want to, if we can wrap it up, I'll just go to this group down here. Okay. This group here. Could you just give me one thing that you might have learnt about humans and how they behave?
Just from that example that sometimes you do make choices.
Yep.
You can go unconscious or conscious, but sometimes you make one of the examples that we just spoke about was safety, and what you do at work is totally different to what you do at home.
Right.
From an economical sense or availability
Yep.
of gear and that
Yep.
sort of stuff. So you actually still make a conscious decision,
Yep.
even though you know it doesn't feel right if you haven't got
Yep.
glasses.
The good thing about making a conscious decision is that at least then you have to own the outcome, right? At least if you do that, put your hand up and say, actually, I chose to do that. Okay? Okay. Now, let me just encourage you, though, that most of the time you're acting in a default behavior that's unconscious, right? As humans, statistically, that's what we do. That's why if you can train yourself to develop default behaviors that are safe, at least then when you're under the pump or under a bit of pressure or under a bit of stress, your default behavior will be a safe one. And if you can, start with your kids. I had a discussion with a group once about, like in New Zealand, I feel like we're becoming a bit of a nana state, and kids can't have fun in the playgrounds anymore or at school. And someone got on to talking about kids climbing trees, and they're not allowed to do it at school anymore, and that's terrible. They should be allowed to. And so, how many people here think that kids should be allowed to climb trees? Right? Now, let me just say that that's based on all of your life experiences up until this point in time. What would change your belief on that? Right? And serious consequences, right? So your 3-year-old falls out of the tree and is in a wheelchair for the rest of their life. Are you going to be encouraging your next 2 or 3 or 4 kids to be climbing trees? No, you're going to have a different view on it based on your experiences. And it's like, you know what? If I have to cut that bit of fun out of my kid's life so they can still enjoy other things, I'm prepared to do that. And the rest of the world might think I'm over the top, but they'll understand when I wheel out my 5-year-old in the wheelchair. Okay?
We do this as parents, though. I mean, normally,
Yeah.
talking from experience, you're sort of very protective of your firstborn.
Yeah.
Sort of a bit of cotton wool, that else.
Yeah, sure.
The third, you
That's right. You give them the keys to the house when they're 6 years old, right? Yeah. And that's because you know what you learn when you're overprotective of your first kid? That you actually can't control them. So you invest all this time and effort and energy into it, and you just get frustrated because they go and do what they want to do anyway, to a large degree. Okay? Of course it is. Of course it is. And as humans, that's what we do. Every day, we're managing risk. Every day. Everything. Like I went for a walk last night. I'm managing risk when I walk out of the door and I cross the road, right? And I'm in traffic that I'm not sure which way the traffic flow goes now. And so I'm a little bit more conscious of, is this a one-way street or is there cars coming from both directions? And in the driveway out of the casino, I'm kind of standing there. I'm not sure if cars are going to stop. So I'm really conscious about it because it's a new environment and I've got a heightened sense of the level of risk. But every day we're managing risk. And sometimes we take shortcuts and we take risks and we get away with it. And so our brain justifies the behavior and we keep doing it that way. If I've never fallen off a ladder trying to clear the spouting in my house, why would I spend $10,000 building a scaffold? Why would I? But the day I fall off a ladder and end up in hospital or a spinal ward, man, I'm going to be pretty upset when I see my kids climbing up the ladder to clear the guttering. Right? So again, we make decisions based on all of our experiences. And sometimes we have to wait for tragedy to strike before we change our belief on something. Right? It's always much better if we can learn a lesson before we have to experience the hard lesson. But you would stop anybody else from now, right? Exactly. 100%, right?
Now, he was okay. He broke his wrist, but, it wasn't, when I say it wasn't a big problem, it was a metre and a half thereabouts, it's big enough. But people stand on handrails all the time.
Yeah.
You watch any work site around the world, I can guarantee you in a shutdown,
Yeah.
you can find somebody standing on a handrail.
Yeah.
Right? But you can't get it through to people.
Yeah.
Feet are dry, feet are stable, I'm okay.
I managed a methanol plant in Canada for a couple of years, and man, some of the things when I first got there were a little terrible, and we're on a mission to change the culture. And somebody said to me, Brian, what do we have to do to change culture here and for people to take this seriously? And I said, one of two things, and people will behave completely different tomorrow. And they said, what's that? Well, we fire somebody or somebody dies. If one of those two things happen, eh? And I mean, that sounds pretty cold and terrible, but that's the reality. Like, if on day one of a turnaround, you fired somebody for standing on a handrail, I guarantee you tomorrow, everybody won't be standing on a handrail.
Having been in both situations, I'd rather be firing somebody.
Me too. And that sounds terrible, and it's not a great experience, but sometimes it's a necessary step, right? And it's a terrible step to take, but actually sometimes you're doing the person a favour, because I would talk to some people and encourage them, hey, this is probably not a good environment for you. You should go and work in a job where you make these mistakes that you're not going to hurt yourself or others, so you might just be giving someone the wrong change, right? Maybe consider. I know for me, I've got 3 sons. Actually, only one of them would be capable of working in a petrochemical facility, because the other 2 are just a little bit unaware, in my opinion. I wouldn't want them working on a site for that reason.
So how do you stop that kid that's fallen out of the tree?
Yep.
And he fixes his arm.
Yep.
You stop him climbing that tree.
Okay, I can share a real example here. So my youngest boy was an adventurous sort of a kid, right? We had to put bolts on our doors because he used to just go walkabout. He'd open the door and just go for a walk. So we bolted the doors, and then he started climbing out windows. I come home from work one day, and I'm pulling into the driveway and hop out of the car, and I hear this little voice, Dad, Dad, Dad. I'm looking around, I can hear Robert. I don't know where he is. And all of a sudden I look up in this tree. Here's Robert, 2.5, 3 years old, top of, you know, a 3 or 4 metre high tree. You know, it's like, okay. Now I've got to think before I say the next things, and I don't want to default to get your ass out of that tree and don't you ever climb back up there. So I said to him, hey Robert, just hold on a second until Dad puts his bag down, and then I want you to just come down. And so I coached him down. When he got down, so I didn't want to kill his adventurous spirit, because that's what's going to make him successful. He's 19 now, right? And he's a sociable kid, and he takes risks, and he enjoys life. He has so much fun. I'm jealous of him, right? And so what I said to him is, hey, Robert, you know, I think it's awesome that you could climb trees like that. But I said, but one thing that I want to ask of you is that you only do it when Mum and Dad are with you. Because the thing that worried me is that we've got plenty of trees around the back of our yard where he fall onto grass. This tree that he climbed, if he fell, he would have landed on concrete. And so I just made him promise me that when you want to climb a tree, just come and get me or Mum, and we'll come with you, right? It's not 100% safe, but a lot safer than what he did, right? So I think you've got to, if I said, Robert, you're not allowed to climb trees, well, he'd just find another way of doing it, because that's his nature, that's his default.
Is the behaviours of it?
Yeah.
Is there a certain amount of that in anyone? Like
Yep.
an example, recently our health and safety officer, who's been our health and safety officer for years,
Yeah.
electrician by trade,
Yep.
always banging on about everything and pulling people up on all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, he went and did totally the wrong thing and ends up falling through a roof building,
Right.
not on site, at home.
Yeah.
Again, all the normal safety
Right.
mechanisms went out the window. This
Right.
is from the key guy that faces this stuff
Yeah.
every day, that you would think
Yeah.
in
Yep.
his thinking, yet it's gone out the window when he's got home because he had a job to do.
It's the switch.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that walk into the workplace and they switch it on.
Yeah.
And they are extremely safe and conscious in the workplace, and then they switch it off and they walk out the gate.
Yeah.
Those people might, growing up, like your son, happy to take risks that you look at and go, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
We did a quick survey. It was about 10 to 15 questions as part of this safety dialogue, which is about risk-taking activity. So it had all these questions. Would you do this? Yes or no? Like really simple answer type stuff to give you a risk profile. Now we ask people to do it in two mindsets: at the workplace, right, and out with their mates on the weekend. And probably 99% came back with two totally different risk asks.
Mm.
But that's the personal risk assessment, because the risks and consequences in those two environments are actually different.
And that's
And so, like, even just a simple one, it's just like same roof, same place, work hours or not work hours kind of thing. It's just like, well, if everything else is the same, the additional risk during work hours is I might lose my job. And that can sometimes just be enough to tip people's risk assessments to do
Yeah.
something slightly different.
Yeah, but if I end up in a wheelchair, I can't do my job anyway.
But that
All right,
happens in both
and I think that this is the breakthrough that people need to have. Is actually the risk is the same. If I fall from 10 metres at work or fall from 10 metres at home, it's the same. If I'm falling onto concrete in both, it's the same. Now we all know that 100 people could fall, 20 of them might end up in wheelchairs, some of them might end up with back problems the rest of their life, and 1 or 2 of them will get up and walk away, wipe the dust off and be perfectly fine. That happens, right? Okay, so the thing is to get into this mindset of, and I know people say, yeah, but you know, I can't afford to build a scaffold around my house to do that. Well, what's your priority? Because if you do fall off that roof, you're going to lose your job anyway, right? So all of those things that you're trying to preserve, you're going to lose them. We're diverting, but if you're okay to divert, because I think sometimes these conversations are better than sticking with the program, right? One of the saddest things, does anybody here know anybody that died in the Pike River tragedy in New Zealand? Okay, so what I'm about to say, I don't want you to think that I'm judging them, because I'm not, because it was a terrible, terrible thing. So 30-something miners went into a mine one day, big explosion, none of them came out. When they did the investigation, right, they looked back over the history of what had happened there. So this was a fairly newly commissioned mine. And it was a project that was fraught with delays, budget blowouts, all these sorts of things, right? And so the ongoing operation of the mine was actually at risk if there was any more disruptions or delays or productivity slowed down. So what had happened is that the organisation started to pay the miners more money, right, for doing more work and extracting more coal, right? So every day these guys were going down, and they were all men, there was no ladies, they were going down this mine, but over a period of time there was this list of defects that had been reported, serious things, like the ventilation shaft wasn't adequate. So if there was a gas leak in there, there wasn't actually enough ventilation capacity to suck the bad stuff out. A lot of the alarms were reported as being faulty and not working. Now, there were one or two people that actually resigned and said, you know what, this place is too unsafe, I'm moving on. But the other, good old hardy West Coast miners of New Zealand need the job, well-paid jobs, they kept going down there. And then one day they didn't come out. Now, some of the reasons why people put themselves in that situation, I'm reading between some lines here, but the investigation was quite thorough and complete, is that there was pressure put on people from the company that, hey, if we don't meet our monthly targets, we might actually shut down and there'll be no jobs for anybody, right? Right. Is there any other Kiwis in the room? Yep, so you guys know the story, right? Okay, so a lot of pressure, so they kept going down. And sooner or later they start to normalise all of these risks that people have reported, because guess what? Oh, the ventilation shaft is not adequate. That's okay. Haven't had any gas leaks. The gas monitors regularly fail. They'll come up at the end of the shift and we realise that our gas monitors haven't been working for the last few hours. So all of this accumulation of defects, but after a while they justify the behaviour. I'm not saying that they intentionally justified it, but they must have believed it was safe, even though they knew there was all these risks, or else why would you intentionally go down a mine knowing that you might not come out? The saddest thing was, there was a 17-year-old boy that had just started working at the mine. Just got a job, right? High-paid job, proud to be going down the mine. And he was supposed to start on Monday. He talked the boss into letting him start on Friday. Right? So he started the Friday before the Monday he was supposed to. So let him come in, went down the mine. That was his last day on earth. Right? So you had 32 other men take a young boy down into a dangerous environment, knowing that all these defects, again, justify because nothing bad had happened until it does, and everything that they were working to protect all got taken from them and they lost their lives. That mine will never reopen and start again. Okay? Now, again, I'm not judging people because I understand how different situations, but as humans, we make those decisions, right? We fall back into default behaviours and we take unacceptable risk until there's a consequence. And often I'll talk to people in groups about safety and they say, oh yeah, but we can't do that at our job, and if we don't do that, we'll get fired. And it's like, well, if you really believe it's unsafe, quit. Go and find another job where you're not being put at risk like that. Oh no, I can't quit my job because I've got a mortgage and I've got this and I've got that. Well, how are you going to pay for all of those things if you can't work, if you're in a wheelchair? So not only have you lost your income, but actually you've lost your mobility and your ability to enjoy life.
I recall there was some time they couldn't recover the bodies.
They've just gone in and they've recovered some, haven't they? Yeah, but this is like 12 years after the event. Okay, so sometimes we justify why I've got to stay in something that I truly believe is unsafe. Okay, so either it's not really as unsafe as you're making it out to be, or you don't care. And people, that can be kind of confronting for people, but that's the reality. If it's really unsafe and you've complained about it or you've notified people and you can't make a difference and make it safer, make another decision. Make another decision.
With all of this is the way humans are,
Yeah.
and it takes a lot to retrain or
Yeah.
convince people to take shortcuts. And I think everybody in this room has admitted
Yeah.
we've taken some
Of course we have.
safety shortcuts.
Yes, we all have.
What's the flip?
Well, the flip is, it's hard until something terrible happens, and then it's easy. So this plant that I worked at in Canada, one of the challenges I had was the operations department who issued the permits to work in the plant. They just blankly refused to engage in a conversation with the maintenance guys coming to pick up permits. And their reason was, well, we're not the policemen. They're competent, they know what they're doing. I've isolated the plant, they've got the permit, I don't need to know what they're doing out there. I don't want to be snooping on them or being nosy or sticking my nose in where it's not wanted. And my conversation was that actually you should be concerned about what they're doing in your plant out there. Just confirm that you're, both are in agreement on what's actually happening out there and that the right controls are in place. It's just a conversation. And it should be done from a position of care, not from a position of, I'm trying to tell you what to do. So it was really hard to make that change until one day there was an explosion. And the explosion was we were decommissioning an old tank that had been taken out of service. And so the maintenance guys went down there, and because the tank had been out of service for such a long time, instead of unbolting the flanges, undoing the bolts on the flange, they just brought a gas torch down and cut the pipes. Right? Now, what they didn't know was that there was a liner inside that tank, and with the heat from the gas torch, it started to kind of started to get hot and some fumes, and then it created an explosive environment. Then boom, there was an explosion. Now, fortunately for the people working on the tank, everything went out through the explosion hatch, so nobody was hurt. But it sure as heck scared a lot of people because you heard this bang from everywhere. Right, and everybody's thinking, oh my goodness, we've killed somebody. That was the first response, right? But the guys out there, they came in, they go, what the hell happened? And we had some really cool video footage from our security camera, actually caught the explosion. And I'll tell you what, the next day I went into that control room, what do you think I saw? Operators and maintenance guys having a conversation. What are you doing today? What tools are you using? Are you bringing in any hot tools? How are you getting that flange apart? Wow. Amazing. Something that was so hard after an event all of a sudden became really easy. Sometimes it takes an event to make it easy, and unless there's a reason for people to change, we resist change. And I'm going to talk about some of these things a little bit later, why we resist change. Okay? So if I don't answer your question by the end of the session, remind me and I'll make sure that I answer it for you, because it's not easy. But every now and then you have a win where you have a potentially significant event that nobody actually gets hurt, but it's a close call and people are reminded about how dangerous their work environment is. All right? So this is where leadership becomes really important. Did anybody else have anything else they just wanted to share after the discussion? Okay, we'll start moving through a little bit. So the core elements that you need in your organisation for people to feel safe, and I'm talking about safety in terms of physical safety and feeling safe about asking questions, sharing ideas, making suggestions, saying no, all those sorts of things, right? So you need a healthy company character, and I define that as having good values and good culture. Now I'm going to assume that your company values are good, that you don't have values that say, let's treat everyone like idiots, let's assume the worst in everybody and let's make everybody feel stupid. I'm pretty sure you're not going to have values like that. So I'm making an assumption that they're good values and a good culture. Then you need to make sure that you have alignment of behaviours with your values and your culture. So it's one thing to have words written on a board describing your culture and describing the values that you want. But if that's all they are, and when you get out into the workplace you don't see any behaviours that reflect those, you're not going to have what we are looking for here. And then the last thing is people feeling respected, valued, and able to maintain their dignity. Most human beings, when they get up and go to work, they want to do something that's value add, something that makes them feel like they're contributing to something a little bit bigger than themselves, right? They want to be appreciated, they want to be loved, they want to be valued, and they want to be able to maintain their level of dignity so when they come home they can say to, Mum and the kids, I had a good day today. Somebody said thank you to me today because I did a good job.
It's pretty rare. They do exist, but it'd be pretty rare someone wakes up in the morning and goes, right, I'm going to go to work and do good shit.
No, that's right. Yeah. But sometimes we assume that's what they come to work to do. Right? We do, and especially managers. Senior managers go, those useless blimmin' maintenance guys turn up to work, all they want to do is take long smoko breaks and work as much overtime as they can and do as little work as possible for it. Right? Where does that belief come from? It comes from snapshots of information. So as a manager, I go and walk out into the plant, and what do I see? I see 5 maintenance guys leaning up against the permit shelter. I come back half an hour later and they're still there. Ah, lazy buggers. What do we pay them to do? Now, I'm a smart guy, and I used to be those people. I know that they're waiting for a permit, right? I know that we have layers of bureaucracy in our business, and sometimes it takes time to get stuff done before people can go to work. And we accept that that's the trade-off for ensuring that we provide the safest working environment. So I'm not going to make a snap judgment. But other people that maybe haven't had my career, so I worked as a fitter and came up through the maintenance organisation and have sat at just about every level in the company for a period of time. So I know what it's like to walk in their shoes. I remember I had a boss turn up from Vancouver, and we had a port facility, and we just employed some new port operators. And so I took my boss down there for a drive and just to show him, introduce him to some people and show him our facilities down there. We get into the control room, and there's these 2 guys, and they're standing there having a chat. So we sign in to the visitors board, and we go for a wander around. We come back about an hour and a half later, walk into the room, and these 2 guys are standing in exactly the same spot. Right? You know what my boss thought on our way back to the plant? Boss says to me, Brian, we just justified employing another 4 people down the port. What do they do down there all day? Those 2 guys were standing around for an hour and a half having a chat, doing nothing. I said, well, I don't know if they were, Kevin. I mean, we were gone for an hour and a half. I don't know if they were stuck there for an hour and a half. Anyway, when I got back to my office, one of the guys rang me. He said, hey, Brian, I know how, because they trust me, right? I've developed a relationship with these people. Hey, Brian, I know how it looked. We walked back into the control room literally 10 seconds before you guys did. Right? We've been out doing our rounds, doing this, doing that, and I know how it looked because when they saw the look on my boss's face, they knew exactly what he was thinking. And I said, look, yeah, I know, mate. I didn't jump to that conclusion, but unfortunately Kevin did. So I'll sort that out. But that's when it comes with low levels of trust, is that you jump to the worst intent, not the best intent. And the same happens, though, with the workforce towards the management. Right? Sometimes they treat managers like idiots because of something that a manager says or something that a manager does without fully understanding the context. We're going to talk about the importance of trust shortly. So if you're able to have great company character, values, and culture, and you're able to have behaviours that align with the values and the culture, and people feel respected, valued, and able to maintain their dignity, you're a long way to having the basis upon which to have the safest place of work you could ever achieve. Okay? And it's got nothing to do with the rules around working at height or going into a confined space or excavations or anything like that. This is just about creating a basis where people can now develop what they need to be safe. So let's start talking about trust. How many people have heard of a guy called Patrick Lencioni? Right? What is he famous for? Hey, that's exactly what this is, right? So this is his idea, not mine. So he talks about highly effective teams and dysfunctional teams. And dysfunctional teams, in his opinion, and based on all the research that he's done, there's an absence of trust right at the base of it. There's fear of conflict, so they don't like to debate for fear of upsetting one another. There's a lack of commitment to the decisions they make. There's an avoidance of being able to hold one another to account, and they take their eyes off the results. So let me start with this one here. All I'm going to talk about is this absence of trust. Trust is the basis upon which to build everything else. If you want to be part of a highly effective team, a highly effective organisation, and you try to do it without having high trust within that organisation, it's just going to be hard work. And you'll see symptoms of a high-performing team from time to time, but that's just people being compliant, right? That's like you slowing down when you see the speed traffic sign, right? Or you slowing down when you see the cop ahead of you, or you putting on your PPE when you see the boss coming down the road. That's compliance, right? And people do it because of a fear of a consequence. So we have to talk about trust and being able to build high trust. And this is where leaders play a massive part. So I felt pretty good that the guy at the port, right, he's just a port operator, and maybe was 3 or 4 layers in the organisation beneath me, felt that he could ring me up, right? I took some pleasure out of that. I thought, man, that's pretty cool. Well, Scott felt comfortable ringing me and explaining something to me. Felt safe. You must trust me, right? So what do I do to keep maintaining that trust, because I know that I can lose it? So many years ago, I read a book called The Speed of Trust. And if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it, because this changed my life in terms of how I engage and interact with people, especially at work. I use it outside of work as well. And I constantly refer to this book. And in this book, it talks about two elements of trust. It talks about character and it talks about competence. Those are the two elements that enable you to create high trust. And in character, we're talking about your integrity and your intent. And with competence, it's around capability and results. So let me give you an example. My mother, who I love very much, she loves her grandchildren. If my mother was to ring me and say, Brian, I've rented a helicopter, right, and I want to take the boys for a spin around the mountain on it. I'm going to say, Mum, I love you, and I know that you mean well, but you actually don't know how to fly a helicopter. My boys aren't hopping in a helicopter with you. That's an element of trust. Doesn't mean that I don't think she's a wonderful person, but she doesn't have the skills to do what she wants to do. So that's the competence part. Likewise, you know that there are people in your organisations that are incredibly competent and do great things. And I was talking to some people about this earlier today, but they lack something here. You don't trust their integrity or their intent. And that happens at every level in the organisation. And this is one of the hardest things to resolve when it comes to trust. I can teach people how to fly a helicopter. Well, maybe I can't, but people can learn how to fly a helicopter. People can learn skills for the job. They can learn how to operate the plant, learn how to fix pumps, learn how to balance a spreadsheet, all those sorts of things. But character, integrity, and intent. So whenever I employed people, I would always be looking for this part. When it came to interview time, this is what I'm looking for. Because the fact that they're sitting in my office in an interview means that they already have the skills that we need. I just want to know if they're going to be a good fit, whether I can trust them, okay? So there's also 13 trust behaviours identified in this book. And I just want to quickly, if you want to just take one and pass it back, pass them around, run through this exercise with you. Okay. So these are 13 trust behaviours that you can do to gain high trust with people around you, all right? How many people here believe that it takes a long time to develop trust? Anybody believe that it takes a long time to develop trust? Hey? Okay, so can I dispel that myth that trusting people is a, eh?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay, trust is a choice. How many people live it? No, let me explain. Because I used to believe that until I read this book. That takes a long time to gain trust, right? How many people in the room live in Melbourne? Okay, so how many people don't? How many people flew to Melbourne? Right? How many of you checked to make sure that the guy or the lady flying the plane was certified or qualified to fly the plane? Anybody? Okay, how many of you asked to see the maintenance records of the aircraft before you hopped on board? So you just trusted your life into the hands of an airline without asking any questions. You chose to trust the airline to get you safely there. Okay.
So, on that argument,
Yep.
I don't fly with the airline because I don't trust them.
Awesome. I don't either. There's some airlines.
So I am looking at time-based data to say that that's an airline I'm going to travel with.
Okay, so what's the latest data on Qantas? I'm assuming you fly Qantas?
Yeah.
So give me some numbers.
That every airplane in the sky
Yeah.
has a fault.
Right?
Every single airline.
Yeah.
So the Qantas lady that lives around the corner from me,
Yeah.
she's part of their maintenance management
Yeah.
program. She said every single plane that takes off has a fault.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, okay, what's the data? Well, they're managing those faults.
Yeah.
Right?
Did you see it or you just take a word for it?
Well, you see, how many Qantas planes have had a catastrophic crash?
I don't know. How many? Because I haven't checked because I just trust it. I just choose to trust.
Zero. How many Qantas planes have landed with a fault? Every single one.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, but you still choose to trust that, right? So when you hop on a specific airplane next time you go to the airport, you're not going to ask to see the last maintenance records of that one or the defect list of that plane, are you? who are you going to choose to trust that it's all taken care of?
Do you check the tyres every time you open the car?
No, I don't. No, I don't. Okay, so the point is, and look, I'm happy for people to disagree. You can disagree. But if you're in a position where you say it takes a long time to gain trust, then you're always going to find reasons not to trust somebody, and all that does is put barriers in the way of progress and creating a culture that you want. Because once I choose to trust Mitch, right, I make a choice. Mitch is here, Horizon Holdings, competent guy. He wouldn't be in the position that he's got if he was a bad character. So when I employ Mitch or he's part of my team, I just trust him. I trust our employment systems. If he's on board, if he's got to take 2 years to impress me before I trust him, then I have to micromanage him for 2 years. So when he comes to me with an idea, okay, I think I don't understand it, but it's probably a great idea. I might ask some questions to verify, just to make sure that we are on the same page, but I have to choose to trust him, or else it's going to be a terrible relationship. Yep, definitely.
My personality type is I'll trust you until you give me a reason not to trust you.
Perfect. Yep.
Right? But others might have been burned.
Yeah. So some people have to choose it. Yeah, that's right. So again, coming back to our brain in terms of why we do things and our justify is based on all of our experiences up until now. But you can change that belief if you choose to, right? You can change that belief. Okay? So what I want you to do is an example. What are the most 5 trust behaviours that are most important to you? Now, what I want you to do is mark the circles of what you think. Oh, you don't have a pen? Oh. I've got a pen for you, mate. Mark the circles that you think, what are the 5 most important trust behaviours that you expect to see in other people? Oh, you don't have a pen either? We've got any pens over here? Can I just borrow it? Yeah. Oh, you got one. Thank you. Okay, just do it quickly. We've got about 15 minutes to go. Okay, don't try not to think about it too long. Now, what I want you to do now is what would you identify and tick the squares and tick as many squares as you like. What would people describe it as a strength that you display? Okay, and the reason we're doing this, and I'll let you finish this in your own time, and the reason for doing that is where you have a tick of what an expectation of yours is, right? What's important to you, and yet is missing in how you would describe yourself, you've got something to work on. So you have an imbalance here of where you expect or something that's really important to you, but it's not a skill or a behavior that you have. So just take that as a good place to start. And I think these behaviors are pretty straightforward, like talking straight, keeping the thing simple, demonstrating respect, creating transparency, no hidden agendas. If you make a mistake, fix it, acknowledge it, own it, show loyalty, deliver good results, get better, confront reality, clarify expectations, practice accountability, listen first, keep commitments, and extend trust. Choose to trust others. And I'll tell you what, when you start to do that with people, it's like, hey, mate, you don't have to come back and ask me for permission. I trust you. I gave you the job because I trust you to do it. Just come back and see me if you need some help. Okay? See you in a couple of weeks. All right? And then we're not talking about blind trust, though. Okay? There'll be some situations, especially if it's a mission-critical situation, highly hazardous, stuff like that. We go through proving competence before we do that stuff, right? Before we let people loose on stuff.
One thing I took away from that is that trust is not holistic. Like, I trust my husband with my life.
Yep.
I do not trust my husband with dinner.
Yeah, that's right. And not because he's a bad person, but because he's a bad cook.
But that's the thing. So it doesn't have to be for everything all the time, all at once. And so you can intrinsically trust somebody
Yep.
with
Some things. That's right. You're 100% correct. So the point is, Eh?
I can't be trusted with dinner. I feel less alone.
Yeah. So your point is 100% correct, and thank you for mentioning it, is that when it comes to trust, it's okay to say, actually, hey, you're not the right person for this task. And it's not because I think you're a bad person, it's just you're an electrician and I need a fitter. Right? So don't feel bad about it, don't take it personally, it's just the way, that's why I employed some fitters. So they can do these jobs and you can do those jobs. Right? Or actually, wait until you've done the training and then you can go and do it. But I trust you enough that I think you've got the ability to learn how to do it. Make sense? Right? And it's character and competence. Hey, mate, I think you're really good at your job. You're a fantastic electrician, but you're a real asshole. You know? And we don't have a place here. I can't trust you. I can't leave you alone with the team because you're just a bad egg. Right? You're disruptive. You annoy people. You know, all of these bad character things. Right? My suggestion is that if you can't manage those character things, you need those people to leave the company because they'll just drag everybody down. And you know what I'm talking about, right? You know what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to be cruel or terrible. It just is. But a lot of leaders still lack the ability to hold people to account to the standards that we set because we avoid confrontation like the plague, right? Okay, just quickly, I'm going to give you a few seconds here. Count the squares. If it looks like a square, it's meant to be a square, okay? It's not technical, it's just... Okay, counted the squares? Biggest number here, smallest number here, line up. So if somebody only saw 5 squares, you start there. If somebody saw 500 squares, you're there. And just put yourself in order. And I don't want you to change your mind. Whatever number you've got, just... I'm trusting you to maintain some integrity and keep that number. How many number? What's your number? Hey?
I've got about like 10, but
10.
then I'm like, there's more than that.
Okay, rightio, just pick a spot. Okay, where are we at? What number did you get? You didn't count them? Oh, why not? Okay. Okay, well, why don't you come down here and you can be a 0 man.
I'm not 0.
Okay. Okay, what's the lowest number here? 11? 4. Okay, 4, biggest number? 30. Okay. 4 to 30. You all looked at exactly the same thing for the exact same amount of time. How is it possible that we have so much variation in the room? Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think that he's just pretending that he saw 30 to be cool? Yes. And that he's just pretending to see 4 to be difficult? Or do we trust one another that we're actually sharing the number that we got to count? No bad intent there or hidden agendas or anything like that, right? You're choosing to trust one another that you're being honest, even though some of you don't know anybody. Turn around. Oops. Hold on. There we go. We'll get there. Okay, have another count. Now that you've had the experience of everybody else's numbers, count again. Okay, now reposition yourself to your new number. How many you get this time? Okay. Okay, what's the range now? How many you got now? 15. Okay, so our lowest now is 15. What's our highest number?
18.
So where's our number 30 gone? What are you now? Okay, so look what's happened. The range has changed from 4 to 30 to 15 to 18. Okay, 25. Okay, so let's go there. So we've reduced the amount of variation, and how do we achieve that? More time. Okay, so sometimes when we present the team with some information, we expect them to see it our way right from the outset. Sometimes they need to see it or hear it 2 or 3 or 4 times. Sometimes you need to engage in, hey, what did you get? What did you get? And now we're sort of influenced by what other people saw as well. And we're shifting our position, and we could do this, and sooner or later the range would come down to 20 to 21. All right? So when we share ideas as leaders at work, we expect people just to get it straight away. Right? Give them some time. Give them some patience. Allow them some time to digest what you've just said. Okay, thank you. Hey? What's that? It's 20 or 21. I always get 20 or 21. I never get the same number, right? Yeah. Oh, you'll get the spread. You'll get it, the presentation. Okay, so I've got a few minutes just to wrap up, and we're going to not cover off everything I wanted to, but hopefully through some of these exercises, you're understanding the basis of why sometimes people just don't see it our way straight away. All right? One of the common mistakes of a leader is, I've spent all this time thinking about something, I've weighed up all the pros, all the cons, all the benefits, all the risks. This is a brilliant idea, and I've spent 3 months working on it. So I expect when I walk out and tell the team, this is the new way we're going to do it, I expect that they'll just get it, because it's just a brilliant idea. But the reality is, I've had the pleasure of 3 months of digesting the information. And even with just 2 cracks at it, we reduced the variation of what people saw by a significant amount. Now, if we did this another 4 or 5 times, we'd get to 18 to 21, guarantee. And then you say, okay, you know what? We might not all agree on all the detail, but we can now move forward on this basis, right? Okay, good leaders allow their teams time, even though you might trust. Now, there'll be certain situations where I say, actually, you know, we just don't have time. You just need to trust me now. And this is what we're going to do. And at some point in the future, you'll figure out why we needed to do it. And that depends on the nature of the crisis that you're facing. Right? It's like when you see a kid about to walk out on the road and there's cars coming. That's not the time to negotiate with a 2-year-old why they should listen to mum and dad. It's like, drag them back, right? And you might even shout at them, all right? And you just have to accept that the little bit of trauma you may have caused them through shouting at them and dragging them back off the road was way better than getting flattened by a car. And that's life, right? In other situations, you'll have time to sit down and explain to the child why they should just listen to what mum and dad say. Okay? Okay. We won't worry about doing this, but think about this in your own time. What are some of the things that you may or may not do that may prevent high trust being established, and what can you do to establish high trust in your organisation? The best thing I can suggest is, you know, read the book or jump online and read the short version of the book online, and you'll get some really good ideas. And you may not agree with them, the writer of the book, and you may not agree with me with everything, but if you try some of those things, you'll establish high trust in your organisation. Okay. So some of the things that have worked for me over time in terms of how I built trust with teams is getting to know people. Take time to get to know people and understand what makes them tick, what's important to them. Value the good things about them. So every person that comes into the workplace, they bring some value. Acknowledge the value, thank them for the value. Celebrate successes with the team. When the business does well, celebrate it as a team. When teams do well, celebrate it with the business. Acknowledge it. Share stories. I know that many of you will leave this today and you'll forget most of what was on the slide decks, but you might remember 1 or 2 of the stories. So learn how to tell stories. Use stories to reinforce key points that you want to make. And lastly, make sure you set a high standard for yourself. Set the standard, set the bar high, and make sure you hold yourself accountable to achieving that standard all the time. But if you go back to one of the trust behaviours, every now and then when you find yourself behaving in a way that doesn't align with the standard or the expectations that you've set, put your hand up and say, I made a mistake. And I'm sorry I did that. And tomorrow when I come back to work, I'm going to try to be a little better. Don't try and hide it or deny it or justify the bad behaviour. Right? Well, I'm under a lot of pressure. Well, everyone's under a lot of pressure. Just own it, acknowledge it, and fix it. Okay, so getting to know people. One of the things that I used to do is get out when we had big projects on our site. I instituted an empty office policy for the first 3 hours of every day. And my managers said to me, what's that for? It said, so you can get out there and talk to the 1,000 people that have just come onto our site. Go out there and get to know people. So they get used to senior managers walking around without audit clips, just going to have conversations with people, get to know them. My finance manager said to me, well, how are you going to measure me on that? Because I think it's a dumb idea. I said, Andrew, when I go out there after week 2, I'm going to start asking people, have you met the finance manager? Right? That's right, yeah. And I said, and if I ask 50 people, have they met the finance manager, and none of them says yes, then you haven't been doing a very good job at it. Right? Get out there, get to know people. Learn about them, talk about sport, talk about family, talk about recent events, anything, right? And then sooner or later you build some trust and people will open up and talk to you. Value the good things. We used to have a habit at the workplace that I had where we'd come around and we'd do an audit, and all we'd talk to you about at the end of the audit is all the shortcomings, right? Well, we changed that. We said, okay, we want to go out there and we want to reward everybody for every good thing they do. So I'd come across George out there in the plant. I'd say, hey, George, you've got all your PPE gear on. That's awesome, mate. You're working at heights. You've got your full protection, all that stuff. Well done. Here's a $20 voucher, right? Hey, but one thing that I noticed is that the area's a little messy. When I come back tomorrow, it'd be good if you've tidied up a little bit. What was the impact on George or the people that we did that to? The next day, I'll walk down the plant and say, hey, Brian, come and check this out. Eat your dinner off the floor in here. Well done, thanks, George. Go and buy yourself a coffee. Simple things, right? But it used to be, hey, George, what's this mess, man? Right? You walk away and people not feeling good because they feel like they've done no value. So value the good things. Say thank you. Leaving thank you notes on people's desk was a great way of, you think you've given them $1 million. And some people really appreciate that. Not everybody. You've got to be careful. You can't do it every day because then people think that you're pulling one over on them. Celebrate successes, luncheons, barbecues, whatever is appropriate in your work environment, because it's only your team that will determine the value of whatever it is you do to celebrate success. I didn't leave it up to me. I asked, what do you want to celebrate success? Some people wanted a barbecue. Some people want to go out and play 10-pin bowling. Some people just want to go up in the cafeteria and have a smoko. Whatever is appropriate. And you'll find that most of it's pretty cheap. Share stories. So get in the habit of being able to tell stories, good stories, bad stories, stories that people can learn a lesson from. I shared the story about the kid falling out of the tree. Now, you'll remember that. And next time you see a kid climbing a tree, it doesn't mean that you're going to shout at them and tell them to get down, but you'll be triggered by it, and you might just spend another moment looking at it, making sure that they're okay. All right? Set the standards really high. I always maintain a very high standard for my management team and myself, and I gave everybody permission to call me out. Now, one of the things that I have to be careful of when somebody says, John says, hey, Brian, I saw you down there the other day. You weren't very respectful when you addressed that work crew. I've got to be careful that I don't jump back to here and justify my bad behavior. Because as soon as I say, oh, yeah, but John, you didn't see what happened before you turned up. You didn't see what they were doing, man. If you had seen it, you would have behaved exactly like me, and you would have probably shouted at them as well. I've just told John, I said, call me out, but when you do, I don't want to hear it. My response, and this is where you have to practice it, and you have to say, when someone calls me out, I'm going to say, hey, John, thanks for that. You're 100% correct. Yep, that was rude. I'm going to go back. I'm going to apologize to those people. Thank you. Right? How's John going to feel about calling me out next time? It's safe to do it, right? And what about if I have to call John out one day? Is he going to feel okay about it, right? Because the rules are the same. Hey, John, I listened to you talk to those people. I think you might need to go back and apologize to them. Yeah, thanks, Brian. Okay? So you start doing these things and you do it enough and you create this high trust environment. Okay, we won't have time to go through all of this, but anyway, just think about this stuff in your own time. When you take it back to your workplace, what are the sorts of things that you can do to continue to build trust? And it has to come down to consistency of your own behaviors all the time. Because as soon as you say safety is my highest priority, but don't ask me to build a scaffold down there because that's too expensive. There might be a cheaper way of doing it than building a scaffold, but you've got to be careful on how you message it. And once you build high trust, your team will allow you to make some mistakes from time to time. They will allow you to make mistakes. They'll cut you some slack. They go, hey, we know that safety is really Brian's highest priority. So even though he said something that doesn't feel like that, maybe we'll just ask him what he meant by that. Because that's not like him, because we know that he truly believes in that stuff and he really is concerned about our well-being. All right? And the last thing is really around communicating effectively. You know, there's so many ways that you can communicate key messages with people these days. When you're in a room full of 1,000 people, big projects and stuff, you've got 18-year-olds and 65-year-olds, maybe older. And they all respond differently to different forms of communication. So you've got to vary the way that you communicate. You've got to communicate a lot. You've got to vary your style. You've got to make it personal, right? Feel like that you're engaged in the system, that I'm not just being a compliant manager because it's my job. I'm doing it because I genuinely care about everybody that comes to work through that gate. Okay, curse of knowledge. Curse of knowledge is when, what I just talked about, you spend months and months thinking about something, right? And then you share it, but there's all these blanks. Let me try something. I'm going to tap out a song. I want you to tell me what the song is. Ready? What's the song? Okay. Nobody? It's easy. Well-known song. How many people have heard of Guns N' Roses? Okay, so it's Guns N' Roses, Take Me Down to Paradise City. Okay, so now I'm going to tap it again. You ready? Did you hear it that time? I know. Thank you. You're 100% correct, and thank you. Thank you. So the curse of knowledge is, the second time you heard it, you were playing the tune in your head, all right? So sometimes we communicate stuff and then we're surprised why people aren't jumping up and down and celebrating the great news. It's because all they're hearing is tap, 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 tap. So you've got to declare what it is. Hey, I'm about to share some wonderful news. What I'm about to talk about is intended to be great news for everybody. You're going to get more job satisfaction, more opportunities, blah, 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 blah. So now when you share the message, people are hearing good news, opportunities, fun times, blah, 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 right? Sometimes you have to go back like we did with the square thing and do it more than once so that the message gets reinforced. But you need to avoid assuming that everybody knows what you're talking about, right? Fun times ahead. Cutting our head count by 20%. Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you, those 20% of people, we're going to shift them up to Canada and put them into work up there. Ooh, yeah. I just want to come home for the winters, that's all. Okay. Share the stories to highlight key messages, align behaviours and actions with communication, right? Make sure that you walk the talk. And one thing I just want to ask you, if you want to avoid these undesirable behaviours, get to know yourself, understand what your default behaviours are, get people to tell you, they'll tell you, right? But be prepared for some feedback. Declare your intent before you share messages. Tell people about what the intention of the communication or the intention of the changes, and then tell them what the change is. Request feedback and welcome it. Even if the feedback's wrong, you want to say thank you every time. So the default position when somebody gives me some feedback, thanks James, appreciate it. I know it's not easy giving me feedback. I can be a bit of a, thanks mate, appreciate the feedback. All right, thanks. Really appreciate that you took the time to give me the feedback. I know it's not easy to come up here and do that. All right? Makes people feel good. Did you feel good? Awesome, there you go. And then get better. And if you do mess up, own it, don't justify it, and learn from it. Okay, now I'm going to leave you with one thing. It's not up on the board. Assume best intent of your boss. Even if they behave like a mongrel from time to time, assume that they always mean well. And when you assume that, you'll change whatever bias you have towards them, and you'll start to hear the good things, just like, what's your name, sorry? Just like Kimberly starts to see Audis on the road now. You'll start to see the goodness in your boss when you assume best intent, because you've triggered your RAS to find good things. If you distrust your boss or you don't like your boss, your RAS will bring to the front all of the things that confirm your belief about the boss and hide all the stuff that doesn't align with your belief, right? So make that one commitment to trust your boss and trust your team. And if you do that, you'll do go a long way forward to creating a good safety culture in your plant. Hey? There we go. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. We're actually over time. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you.